It is a truth galactically acknowledged that a single Pezrin in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a husband.
Zinshiki looked at the statement she'd written in her omnipad and considered it. The classes offered to nobles at the academy were so very different from her former school. Her class in logic was interesting, and while diagramming sentences were proving to be a chore, testing them was an interesting exercise. Apparently, learning to discern the truth from lies was an elective for Shrivanti nobility, though in her opinion it should be mandatory for everyone. Regardless, it was a truth galactically acknowledged, though in her present situation Zinshiki felt less certain. What she absolutely acknowledged was the difficulty getting that mail out of her head. That tested the assertion over time, but it remained her truth. The was undoubtedly true, but she left the is there on the page. On the other claw, it could be asked, is it a truth galactically acknowledged? That simple change made it one of those things that everyone thought was so and generally accepted, but still begged the issue. The sort of question that was presumed to be true from the outset, so the question could become a true evaluation, or even a trap. After all, a test of something everyone presumed was wrong seemed a bit pointless, unless it wasn't. The class had begun with the proposition that A plus B equaled C, then started assigning values and testing them. If A plus B equals C, and A plus D equals C, then D must equal B. Fair enough, until values had turned into statements. And rather than simply defining a statement's value, one had to go through a torturous process of logical statements, leading from a proposition to a proven and sound conclusion. That had been an interesting challenge, but this week's task was to create her own statement and test it, rather than being given one. And there it was. What she had written stared up at her like an annoying accusation from her subconscious, but it could not be denied.
If I were not going to this tide pool tonight, I think I would go insane.
Certainly she was curious. The girls had been less than forthcoming about their destination, and searches on her omnipad, well, some things should not be believed, and most of them lived on the datanet. The sentence could stay. She needed to examine what she was thinking, and logic would help. Besides, Professor Teldra was frightening. The slim Shrivanti woman was well into her waning years, yet still looked slim and fit under the academy blazer and black slacks. She wore her silver hair short and brushed back, but it was her smile that was unnerving. Brilliant, polite and soft-spoken, she wore a bemused smile almost perpetually, the sort of expression one saw with expert hunters, and expected on a better class of crazed serial killer. Zinshiki made certain her homework was never late. That still left how she would attack the problem. Having set out the proposition, the exercise called for running it through an evaluation of no less than 10 lines to arrive at a tested conclusion. She looked at the sentence again, accusingly. The desire to find a partner in life was generally accepted by everyone. While some individuals ended up alone by choice, the galaxy was well peopled. Finding a mate was the thing to do, and showed no signs of going out of fashion. So, it might not be a universal absolute, but generally acknowledged would serve. So it was generally accepted. She looked at the end of the sentence and swiped out husband and wrote in mate. The broader statement took in both genders and made her look less desperate. It was still personal, but there was no sense in turning back now. So it was generally accepted that people wanted to find mates, particularly if they had the means to support them. No Pezrin doubted the truth of that. Life was harsh. It was senseless and unforgivable to bring kits into the world before you could support them, and Warbands planned the family as a matter of survival. That was an absolute on Pesh, and the worlds of the Alliance tended to be far more chaotic and just as impoverished, if not so harsh in climate. It could certainly be accepted that her race had gotten, what had Warwick called it? The short end of the stick? But even if that was so, moving into the galaxy had not been precisely liberating. Life on a ship with one's warband was even more of a delicate balance. There were priorities. The Pathfinder found work. The warband paid for the ship. You kept flying. You kept fighting. And in the limited confines the freedom of your ship offered, the band mothers and the Pathfinder decided when it was right to allow new matings and kits. That was the way of things. At least, it had been. Now, thanks to Warwick, her warband had land. Not just a contract to guard the land, but actual land in their possession. And property. The ranch had actual meat animals to herd, and Shinshiki could read between the lines. Her warband was working itself senseless maintaining the ranch and their current contract, but it was a labor fraught with excitement and love. As soon as their contract was done, the expectation to roam free and tend the lands for a profit. Well, excitement didn't cover it. Her birth mother had actually smiled. That she had done this was a great honor, though it came with obligations. Obviously she had to care for her hakakt. Even if it was not a case of inheriting his name, the warband owed him a debt, and she was seen as the girl on the spot. The duty fell on her. Less obvious was her duty to her new sister. If Deshin and her elder sister, Padviri, ever met, someone might die on the spot. Deshin might do well with Raikishi, though. Raikishi was dedicated to becoming the next Pathfinder, and while Zenshiki enjoyed learning, the two women had made it into their mania, though if Deshin could get a word in edgewise, it would be a major Shovanti victory. Least obvious of all, and a secret she had to keep, was Melondi. Not even her band mothers could know about that, but there it was. She had achieved much for her warband, but the debts incurred bound her with great chains of ice and fire, as if forged by the Dark Mother herself. Perhaps they were. Returning to the page, she stared in the middle of the sentence. She was single. Dark Mother, when she stared into that boy's eyes and drawn in his scent, she had felt so very single, so very eligible, and... Zenshiki extended a claw, and jabbed it hard into her thumb. Focus! Fine. Single. That was fine. 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 That left only one portion unresolved. In possession of a good fortune. She was set to inherit an exceptionally good name. That was a significant accomplishment, and while it might not put food on the table for Kits, it remained a life goal any of her people would admire. Evilheart was a hunter's name, and there was no question that she'd earned it. Even if she had not acquired food in the traditional way, her successes, by skill or fortune mattered not, had brought worth to the family. Her name, when she received it, would already be imbued with weight, invested with power. Padviri was probably stewing with jealousy. Zenshiki's lips drew back at that happy thought, showing a hint of fang. Her warband had land now. That was also a matter of considerable fortune. The few warbands that had managed to acquire a ship, while they were free to roam the galaxy, ships meant being perpetually riddled with debts. There were always jobs, but one did not settle without owning land, and land was expensive. So there was that. Even as a family inheritance, it was impressive. Finally, her Hakakt had acquired a considerable fortune for his mates. That meant that some portion might come to her, eventually. Her warband had acquired wealth, and she might acquire personal wealth. That was the sort of thing that never happened. Personal wealth was something you passed on to the family, or started one of your own, though that meant being in want of a mate. Very well, that would work. Later, she could write up the evolution of the sentence to its final logical conclusion and present it with confidence. Closing down her omnipad, she opened her senses and took in the chaos of the room. Her school band was assembled, and the rituals were beginning. There were some newcomers, and the girls were being treated with reasonably appropriate suspicion, though no one had been clawed.
Shelvanti.
At least there was appropriate reverence for sharing the chocolate, which the girls were grudgingly doing. Food was sacred. Sharing it built ties, and both Melondi and Deshin had made their case before the new girls arrived. It's just being polite was a cunning euphemism. In sharing a sacred food with these interior girls, Melondi made their allegiance tangible, binding them to her personally. Her family was in conflict, fracturing. Given her station, that put Melondi on death ground, and it was sensible to gather allies before the fight. That would continue until the rift ended, and the Tasu family warband stood united. Fractured warbands did not survive without a united consensus. In the end, there could be only one.
You can put it away.
One of the Kerbal sisters, Kaslin by her scent, leaned down over her left shoulder a moment before Kamara hovered over her right, adding,
It's Shell.
Thank the Dark Mother they were Shelvanti and lacked any real stealth. As it was, the experience was always oddly freakish. To see them without the benefit of scent would certainly feel unnerving. Closing up her omnipad and tucking it away, she rolled slightly, her psyche flickering with amusement, though she regarded them without blinking.
I thought you would both be with your human.
Kaslin blushed faster than her sister, if only by moments. Kamara had more poise, but the scent of her conviction was just as strong as her sister's.
We're seeing Sammy again tonight.
Both of them were blushing furiously now.
It is a truth galactically acknowledged.
The delay made sense. The twins were seeing their chosen male, but they were also a part of the school band. While Shelvanti did not do such things, there was no doubt the girls had given their loyalty to Melondi. The movie ritual and sharing of sacred food were part of that obligation, a matter of honor. Any patron could see the obvious. Of course, before the movie ritual, there were matters of business. The chocolate, which her school band held sacred, was passed about. The bowl had recently been filled after a foraging hunt out to human food, but there were more girls present. It meant rearranging the traditional order of seating in the video room, and offering the bowl to the 3 new girls first as hospitality demanded. When the bowl finally arrived, however, Shelvanti metabolisms ran fast, demanding a caloric intake that would stagger a Pezrin. Their ability to consume mass quantities was hateful, given they could stay trim and fit on what amounted to a daily feast, but it also gave them a sweet tooth. Her band sisters considered chocolate to be a sacred food, so it was necessary to follow along. In practice, though, only one variety was palatable. The rest... She looked in the bowl, filled with the lighter labels of milk chocolate that disagreed with her, and the white packaging that inferred the truly vile white variety, and sighed. Eek. Sitting on her right, Deshin leaned up on one elbow and nudged her, slipping over a bar.
Don't worry, she whispered. I found you this.
It was meant to be a gift, and she blinked, slowly, acknowledging her. The packaging was white, which probably indicated the vile white variety, but she looked at it further. There were strips of meat shown, covered by a mass of dark chocolate being drizzled atop it. That was curious.
I cannot read this,
she murmured, keeping her voice down. It seemed Deshin intended this just for her, which carried a certain debt.
What does it say? It's dark chocolate. I know you don't like the other stuff.
Deshin gave her a smile that sensibly did not show teeth.
Anyway, it's mostly maple bacon.
She looked down at the package again and considered the appropriate thanks to give, but was cut off as the next portion of the ritual began.
Right! Speaking of which...
Jaxmi was leaning into Belda, examining her bruised eye with exaggerated glee.
Going to tell us about last night, or do we have to drag it out of you?
More mating rituals. Without the demands of competition, humans clearly had it easy.
You need to stop fidgeting. She'll be here in a minute.
Tom stopped fidgeting, though he drew the line at, "Yes, dear." Leia was right. He'd been fidgeting, and it wasn't a good look for anyone over the age of 5. That didn't make it inappropriate, given the circumstances. It just wasn't a good look. He looked over at Miv. She was just finishing ordering breakfast for 4 in their rooms. Rooms, plural. He'd expected large and plush, but a suite at the Imperial Ocean Reserve translated into somewhere you could land a plane in. Maybe that was it. Back at the academy, he'd be on his own turf. He'd be cooking breakfast instead of having it brought in, keeping busy in the kitchen, giving himself time to think. Sure, their suite had a kitchen, but like the rest of their rooms, it felt vast, oversized, and while there was a stepping stool for men, it lacked the sensible amenities he needed most, reducing him to instant coffee. Ick. Not that he'd expected a coffee maker, but he hadn't expected to wake up on his honeymoon and be told to get ready for a date, either. The girls hadn't put it that way, of course, but they were excited. Miv had gotten up first that morning, and while Leia looked fit to sleep in longer, Miv had dragged her out of bed with much shushing and muffled giggles. Even half awake, he'd heard their voices indistinctly through the wall. Leia and Miv talking. Leia exclaimed something. More talking. Growing excitement in both voices. He'd groaned at that point and decided to roll out of bed. At 6'2", he appreciated a lot of room, but given the size of the thing, a Sherpa guide might be in order. There hadn't been a lot of time for sleep last night. Miv had woken Leia up before he'd quite finished. It felt like a damn long crawl to the edge. Damn prehensile tongues. Screw the accident. Chandra, my boy, you'd have been stone dead by now. Alright, his ladies were thirsty. It was their wedding night, and rather than blushing new brides, his wives knew each other very well, and they didn't mind taking turns or drawing things out. Probably a skill set, since sure guys have no stamina. I'll bet Professor Burgress doesn't teach that one. He'd surprised them both last night, and now they'd surprise him. Emerging from the bedroom, he fully expected to face questions about his trip around the lobby. Clearly, Lady Vond hadn't forgotten him, and Torona Roche wanted his head on a pike. But that third noble? Was he that well known? Sure, there were news stories after the wedding, but a threesome with their own private mobs was ridiculous. But no. Instead, what followed was a rush to get showered, get dressed, and get presentable. They had company coming. That charming Captain Tonnis, who'd saved him, gradually transformed over the next half hour into just Solani. Alright, it was only breakfast. Just keep telling yourself that and maybe you'll believe it. Look at how excited Leia is. It didn't make sense. Or did it just not make sense to him? Alright, Tarola had looked ready to skin him alive, but what was the worst that would have happened? A night trapped in the hotel bar until the girls fetched him out? Probably. Anytime you had to ask that question, it usually ended up worse than you thought. He hadn't really been in mortal peril. Probably. Not that you think it, listening to Miv. So he sat down at the table and stopped fidgeting. He did owe Tonnis that much. He'd been a wreck that night on the cliffside, and she'd gone out of her way, and come out of cover, to help him out. A night spent wedged between 3 hostile noblewomen didn't sound like a treat either. Explaining why he was drinking in a bar with 3 women and a sizable entourage of others on his honeymoon, instead of being with them. Okay, that would have been worse. It was just breakfast. Miv got on with Solani, but maybe Leia wouldn't like her. God, why do you hate me? I shouldn't have to face this, drinking instant. Prindi Amundis tried settling into the room, with a sort of surreal fascination. The Pezrin girl, Zinchiki, was there, and that didn't help, but the really jarring thing was everyone being so informal. The princess didn't seem to mind in the least. It had to be part of her cover, but the rest of her entourage seemed fine with it. That much was practically the first page of interior training. Whatever the nobility does, you study, observe, assist, or rest, but always keep a professional demeanour. I'm surprised more of you didn't come. Prindi startled at the princess's question. She'd been staring at the alien girl as she set about licking the wrapper. She focused back on the princess and fought the urge to not come fully to attention in her seat. Some of us were going to, but, well, honestly, I don't bite, and I want to thank you for your support. Princess Kalira smiled warmly and nodded. I know Agent Davari put you on the spot, but I appreciate your service. Thank you, ma'am. Melondi. She gulped. It wasn't the kind of slip she'd normally make, and now she was on the spot, with that question. It's not that. Cadet Senior Agent Shalara is organizing the training, and the rest, well, they wanted to. I think yesterday we were all coming, but, She clamped her hands to her side to avoid looking awkward. No matter how informally the princess wanted to make this seem to be, this wasn't an exercise. This was the real thing, not an exercise. Some of us watched the file, the one from the war game. I know we can't tell you, but what's the problem? Her Imperial Royal Highness canted her head, and Prindi felt her stomach drop out. She already had to give up the rest of her day when her group rotated out to human food, but this was worse. How to put it delicately? It kind of put them off. Prindi tried the simple approach, though watching Lark grin didn't help. What in the deets was wrong with these women? I mean, if this is the stuff that's getting censored, it's kind of rough. Okay, as your advisor, I better tell you to stop now. The girl named Desi, she was friends with Lark, stepped into the conversation without permission, and actually laid hands on Her Highness, tugging her back onto the couch. Desi grinned at her bewilderment. We're sort of used to this kind of thing, but thanks for the heads up. Advisor? Prindi repeated. It felt like the planet had shifted, inexplicably, deciding to move 2 steps to the left and settle like nothing had happened. Just roll with it. The one named Jacksme grinned at her. You're with the cool kids now. Beside her, Cadet Vandra blinked at that, but rallied. Hey, we get to blow stuff up. Meh. The girl named Priz shrugged laconically as she opened her wrapper. The twins know how to rip stars apart. That won't happen. One of the twins sat up indignantly. The other nodded emphatically as she finished most of her snack. Probably. Blow up? Like Jack said, roll with it. Desi was still grinning at her. It's a human expression, but it's basically ride the tide. What have we got today? The girl named Nespa sang out from the back couch, and the princess looked over at Desi, canting her head. It was eerie given how close one looked to the other, though the twins were worse. Well, we have a lot. Desi held up her omnipad and shrugged slightly as she peered down at the screen. More than enough for today, since we're cutting things short. Yeah, you're getting out of learning to wait tables, you lucky... There was a chorus of noise from the girls, and Desi stuck the tip of her tongue out. This was surreal, but at least the Pezrin girl has stopped mewling. Right, so... Her Majesty, Melondi, gave a sigh, but was looking at the others apologetically. Surreal didn't cover it. Why would she look apologetic? Why should she? Ride the tide. Prindi took a breath and tried to focus. It was how it was.
Well, we have one called American Pop. That's the one we sent to Aku.
Desi looked over her way.
It has a lot of music in it, so you three might not like it.
Music didn't seem so bad, particularly compared to what she'd seen last night. They Shall Not Grow Old had made half the cadre sick, seeing boy after boy slaughtered like that. There hadn't been many images of the bodies, but the narrative had been brutally obvious, and...
That's fair.
One of the sisters was nodding to the other before both looked back. The one that hadn't spoken took her turn, both of them looking her way. That could be the stuff of nightmares.
It's animated, too. Kind of unusual stuff. Okay, save that one. We have John Wick, which comes in 5 parts.
Desi thumbed down her omnipad.
That's way too long, but I think it's about dancing.
Dancing? Belda leaned forward.
I know he likes musicals, but that's weird. This last one's named John Wick 5 Ballerina.
Desi shrugged.
They're dancers. I looked it up. I think I've had enough dancing for a while.
Belda looked at the others apologetically.
What else do we have? We have Kill Bill, which comes in 2 parts. Silverado. And Unforgiven. The last 2 are set around when we started our class, but not the Civil War. Not war movies? Let's try those.
Sitting beside her, Vandra already had the words out of her mouth, but Prindy nodded enthusiastically, just to be sure.
Fair enough,
exclaimed Sephir, while Dasalan nodded. The 2 stars of the diving team were sitting to the left of the short one with the bruised eye. That was Belda. Word had gotten around she'd landed a human boy. Wild West Turok's boys for the win.
Right.
Speaking of which... The one named Jacksme was leaning in, examining the bruised eye with glee.
Going to tell us about last night? Or do we have to drag it out of you?
Zenshiki had opened a bar of something. While she couldn't read the human inscription on the bar in her hand, the alien girl obviously liked whatever it was.
Okay.
This couldn't get any weirder. She sighed and opened the wrapper on the snack she'd been given. Belda took a deep breath. She'd known this was coming. It was just so embarrassing, though.
Well, I took him out to Orinka Plaza, just like on our first date.
She hated being the focus of attention, but there was no escaping this. If the interior girls would just stop staring, though. They were looking at her in a range from disbelief or amazement, or something. It put her off for a moment, but she took a short breath and jutted her tusks slightly, the one veering closest to disbelief.
Lick me, bitch.
Alright, that wasn't nice, but those interior girls had no idea what a human sister-in-law might be like, and while Hope might not be an ordinary human matriarch, she knew all the right things to say. She'd worked hard to be with Liam.
Yeah, get to the good stuff,
Jacksme settled in, resting her head on her hands.
And don't tell us there isn't any. How'd you get that eye?
She'd promised to keep Liam safe when she took him out, but one go alone in the big city wasn't enough. Back home on Willist, her family name would keep any but the horniest Turok wrangler in her place, and if not, well, she learned how to fight growing up, protecting her younger brother and her 2 cousins. Even if the ranch had almost 400 people on it and all of them would come running, she'd still learn the hard way. Some days when the boys just had to go into town and one of the locals would get frisky, or worse, some drunk ranch hand from one of the other estates, back in off a long drive. A girl always had to watch out for trouble, but she'd promised, even if it had been 3-1.
Come on, Willist.
Priz was practically crooning.
We know where you went, so get on with it. Well, we danced a while, and talked.
Wait! This human guy is real? The IOTC girl that had been sitting there in disbelief suddenly blurted. I thought that was all Turok shit. I mean,
Does he have a brother? Like you know anything about Turok shit. Liam is real. We've all met him.
Pris came solidly to her defense, and the rest of the girls nodded, leaving the IOTC girl sitting there with her mouth open. Her name was Vandra. It didn't matter. Belda felt herself riding a wave of gratitude that turned out to be short-lived, as Pris grinned at her wickedly.
So, what did you talk about? Well, about his home. And mine. Ride him, Turok's girl.
Nessa was grinning, and Belda felt the blush taking over.
Going to rope him down and take him home to meet the family? It wasn't like that.
She was definitely blushing now. Goddess, she hated that.
Establishing where a pair will live is important. Deciding which warband you will join is a different choice.
Zinchiki regarded the others coolly while grooming her tail. Her Asaic was flickering slowly as she ran a claw through her fur.
The Pathfinders usually prevent combat, but it does matter. Okay. Very domestic.
Desi was grinning at her as much as the rest.
So, what happened next? It was nice, really. He doesn't want to go back to Earth.
She paused, trying to figure out how to explain the next bit. She'd been so sure he'd lost something.
Then he got down on one knee. Was he taking off his shirt?
The IOTC girl again, though at least she had the decency to be blushing when she blurted it out.
I mean, we saw the wedding, and they almost... Liam does not take off his shirt,
Belda snapped. IOTC or not, the girl had the decency to quail. It kind of helped. She felt more in charge of the explanation.
It's a human thing. During proposals. Desi, tell them. Beats me, Desi shrugged. Sounds right, though. I wish I had a credit for every weird custom I've heard about. Right, Belda said firmly. So that's when Freya Dixie Girl sort of tried taking him away, right as we were proposing to each other and everything.
Pandemonium erupted.
You were proposing to each other?
Letzi cantered ahead. Most of the others were too busy shouting out questions about the Adixie.
They tried taking him away, and yes, we were proposing to each other, Belle huffed. So, that's when I hit them. Combat. Very good.
Zinchiki was nodding, sagely.
Did you draw blood? Wait, you hit an Adixie?
That was Prindy. The IOTC girl Lark knew. Was Lark taking notes? She didn't have time to really look as Prindy carried on.
You hit an Adixie? I hit all the Adixie. It's not like they were soldiers, she said defiantly. Liam tried to help, and if he'd hit the one girl in the nose instead of going for her gut, he probably would have... He fights?
Vandra was shaking her head, lost in disbelief again.
A boy? Human boy. Trust me, we believe it, Melondi said firmly. Belle, you know what we want to hear about, but now I've got to know. How did you get the eye? I mean, it couldn't have gone that badly. It didn't. It's just that after the fight, the bouncers arrived.
She sighed at the memory of how that went over.
I thought one of them was going to try taking them away, and... Well, I'm pretty sure she used to be a soldier. She put me in a headlock while these 3 other girls were checking him out. I mean, not checking him out like that. They just wanted to be sure he was alright. And that's when he told them we were proposing. Liam kind of said the 3 Dixie girls might have been trying to kidnap him. So that's when the constables were called. And we had to give a statement and... Belle!
Melondi slapped her palm to her forehead and was staring at her in disbelief.
Did he say yes? Oh, yeah, he did. I'm taking him to meet my family, and we'll wait until I'm out of school. In the meantime, he's going to stay with his sister and get a job here in Shill.
Belle grinned happily at that, before mumbling,
That's when they offered him a job there. Dancing.
Desi blinked.
What? You mean like... No, I do not mean like.
She crossed her arms over her chest and scowled. Fine, he wanted to work, but it would not be at the tide pool.
People just don't understand humans. Though maybe I should start thinking about a second wife. Professor Pelavon probably has it easy.
Mavere closed the door and turned her back to the wall with a smile. Shalea was grinning and arched one eyebrow, canting her head. That looked good. Tom sat on the couch staring into his hands, looking at them both like they were... She sighed. Here, he was the alien, but it was so easy to forget. Even as tall and as pink as he was, there were times when he could still behave like a normal man. Shulvanti males were always cautious. They had to be. So that was when sensible women stepped in. And Solani was charming. She wasn't a girl. Goddess, the woman looked capable of breaking someone in half. As a Death's Head commando, she probably could. For all of that, she'd had the decency to look scared to death. That was important. There was only one matriarch, and while she and Leia were long past any such foolishness, a younger woman might have ideas. Solani had obviously been raised well, and she'd done something else right by chatting with Leia. A girl out to stake a claim always went right for the boy, and maybe had the sense to talk to the first wife, but that was where they fell short. Ignoring the co-wives betrayed pure selfishness, and Solani hadn't done that, taking the time to carefully answer Leia's questions, and deferring to her. And oh, she definitely had a thing for Tom. That made her restraint even more commendable. She just wasn't grabbing for the first boy she saw. Alright, this was their wedding weekend, but you took what the goddess brought you, when she brought it. The situation was worth exploring, and another date was in order. Leia certainly thought so. The approval on her face said that much, particularly given they just had their first night together. Leia had a hard time of it out in Kryn Tori, but she was like her mother's. She had a wonderful people sense. Hopefully Solani won't mind the nudity. Alright, maybe that was looking too far ahead, but Leia's mothers were particular. That just left... Tom? Miv slipped over beside Leia to smile at their husband softly. Did you have a nice time? Sitting on the couch, Tom rubbed his forehead, studying them both for a moment before sighing heavily. I need sleep. And real coffee. Well and well then. Even if a man was another species, that didn't mean they were aliens. Zinchiki watched the city roll past from the window of the aircar, and considered the trip toward the tide pool, and considered the conversation going on between Melondi Kalira, Deshin, and their escort, Sergeant Vaeko. There was a great deal the Shulvanti did not consider. Names, for one thing. Melondi Kalira, obviously. You could not know who or what a thing was unless you knew the proper name. That was a truth universally accepted. Unless two beings shared an understanding about what a thing was, you could not discuss that thing at all. That meant, first and above all else, you started with a name. Melondi Kalira was a study in contrasts. She had spent the day with women who would die at her command, yet she spent it as Melondi, rather than Kalira. She was trying to gather their loyalty, rather than command it, but that was a Melondi thing. Yet she had been raised as Kalira. And while Senshiki did not know what that meant for the girl, it unquestionably had meaning for the Shulvanti. Regardless, she spent her time as Melondi Kalira, not as Kalira Melondi. It bore careful study. Her clan had benefited, and there was debt, but there could also be danger. Danger was good. She could prove her worth to her Hakakt. Deshim was another matter. Her background was as complex as her behavior and just as inexplicable. Having grown up impoverished was something a Peshran could understand, yet she had no problems with announcing she was advisor to a princess of the Imperium. She held a proper name and had been adopted by a house, a matter that carried as much weight to the shill as to a warband, yet she was comfortable with a diminished name, Desi, instead of her proper name of Deshin. It was odd, but fair. By rights, she could have insisted on being called Deshin's sister, had she known the proper phrase.
How could she, when I have not taught her? Allowing this ignorance says more about me than her, because I deprive her of choice.
Shinjiki felt her Asaic twitch in annoyance, and ran a hand down his length, calming her mind. It was a welcome distraction, though. According to the map, they were quickly approaching the place called the Tide Pool. It merited thought that the girls insisted on an air car for this outing, instead of an autocab. The trip could be made either way, but they had insisted on speed and stealth, assisted only by... I love the movie! Sergeant Vaeko was gushing. The woman was a commando of the Shivanti Imperium, a trained killer. The Death's Heads maintained an aura of prowess. According to the Pathfinders, it was entirely justified. Vaeko should not gush happily. It lacked gravitas.
So alien.
There was nothing profitable down that line of thought, however. It was a distraction without merit, placing barriers to understanding rather than removing them. Shinjiki pushed the thought away and focused on the conversation. The woman had seen the movie, which meant a camera Shinjiki could not hear. Her Asaic flickered as she considered renewing her search. There was no need to wander the dorm in her skin suit, but the camera she found followed a consistent pattern.
Watching Melondi Calera.
That meant examining those places where she would be, in locations offering a good vantage point, and where there was not noise. It would be a good test of skill when time allowed. For the moment, it was of no consequence. The security was a fact to be dealt with, should they become a nuisance. Trained on Melondi Calera, they were not a threat. Her Asaic kept rising, and she pressed it to the seat harder than was necessary. She'd taken the pheromone blockers. Whatever there was to discover at their destination, she would permit no loss of self-control. This was a hunt. Not that Melondi Calera's escort was helping. Possibly it was an awe of Melondi Calera, like the IOTC girls displayed, but that seemed increasingly unlikely. Instead, it seemed that Sergeant Vaeko simply liked to talk, and her smile was infectious.
It's only one evening. The contagion shouldn't be fatal.
Her Asaic twitched, wanting to rise again. The blockers should be fully in effect, and she shuddered restlessly. Perhaps it was best to give her mind over to the conversation, such as it was.
Anyway, the girls are all just thrilled for Belda.
Vaeko burbled enthusiastically. While she spoke with some deference to Melondi Calera, she lost all reservations with Deshin.
We didn't even make bets on if he'd say yes. We were all rooting for her. You make bets?
Deshin asked uncertainly.
Sometimes. Sorry, I know that sounds terrible, but it's never about anything important. It just passes the time out in the bunker, you know? Things would get pretty tense otherwise.
Vaeko bit her lip.
It's not awful. Most of the time it's like being deployed on the ship, but there are still times you end up thinking how you're stuck underground. I don't know how Lieutenant Tala stands it, going out in the service tunnels all the time. I'd use the remote drones, but her pod insists on checking it all by hand. No need to apologize.
Deshin was grinning and leaned in conspiratorially.
Mel and I owe you our lives, and I definitely owe you my father's life. Just don't tell Jax.
Goddess! Melondi Calera snorted at that. Can you imagine?
We won't, I promise.
Vaeko nodded, adding, Melondi. The name had been tacked on at the end so quickly that it would be easily mistaken for familiarity. It was deftly done. Sergeant Vaeko remained cloyingly bubbly, yet she still managed to make it sound like a title.
Anyway, we appreciate the movies. Thank you so much for letting us watch with you. We're there, and you're keeping me safe. All of us.
Melondi Calera smiled easily, canting her head. Did you think the IOTC girls liked them? It seemed like they got off to a rough start.
It was the blood.
Shinshiki felt surprise, realizing the voice was her own. She looked up and blinked at the three women staring back at her.
It is a matter of sacrifice and risk. Sooner or later, all good stories are about blood. We could have watched John Wick. It has dancers,
Desi replied with a frown.
If it's got 5 parts, it has to be good. Silverado was great, though. Unforgiven, too, though I think Vandra got a little ill over the bit with the knives. Like I said, it is all about blood.
Shinshiki nodded firmly, making certain the others understood. Shovanti body language was so limited.
That and the moral of these stories. Moral? I mean, they were good, but what moral? I thought it was perfectly clear.
She hid her sigh.
Do not let an angry human drink alcohol. Oh, yeah, maybe.
Deshin bit her lip and frowned thoughtfully as the aircar banked, starting its descent.
It was kind of a theme.
Just as well. John is a male's name, isn't it? 5 dancing movies would have been a lot, Malondi Kalira said as she peered out the window at the wash of lights from below. I think we're about to have all the male dancers we need. We're here. After waiting for the air car to settle, Shinshiki got out with the others. She watched it roll away before slowly taking flight once again, then turned to examine their destination critically. The building was large, done in the usual Shovanti taste for architecture, though the oversized statue outside the foyer was...
That's not unusual.
Come on, Shinshiki. Deshin was there beside Malondi Kalira and Vaeko. The smile she wore was not unusual, but the arched eyebrow.
I asked to come, hunting answers. Mischief or no, I will find them inside.
Enjoying the space afforded by their departing aircar, she ignored the curious onlookers that passed by, flooding into the building. Stepping across the road to the base of the elaborate forecourt, she paused to give Deshin a long look and blinked slowly, before following through the doors in their wake. She suspected the meaning of the look was wasted, but that was something for another time. As her eyes adjusted, she looked up at row upon row of figures displayed along the foyer and... She drew a breath and stared. The figures on display were so very on display.
Oh, Dark Mother, she breathed. There were so many. Shinshiki, why is your tail all stiff?